good evening. You're watching WION's special broadcast at 9 p.m. I'm Sana Khan. It's been 2 months now. The standoff between India and China at Doklam continues. For now, the PLA and the Indian forces are face-to-face, readying for any eventuality. But India insists that a diplomatic solution is the only logical way to go forward. But China continues to be belligerent in its approach. Now, a new report published in Global Times suggests Beijing is planning a small-scale military operation within 2 weeks' time. Over the next half hour, we take a look at the present situation and the talk of war and a diplomatic solution all at the same time. Here's a report first.
It's been 2 months now. The Doklam standoff continues, with neither of the two sides willing to budge from its original stance. While India is trying hard to balance its own reliance on diplomacy and refusing to drum up a hysteria war, China might have other plans. US experts have been already warning of it. Now, experts in Beijing are suggesting that they might go ahead with the idea. An article published in state-run Daily Global Times quotes an expert as saying, China is planning a small-scale military operation to expel Indian troops from the Doklam area within 2 weeks. And China will inform India before going ahead with the plan. Global Times in particular has been at the forefront in leading a psychological war on India in wake of the standoff at the tri-junction of India, Bhutan and China. The article was published hours after India said that war cannot resolve anything.
मतभेद होते हैं देशों के बीच में, हमारा भी बाउंड्री डिस्प्यूट भी है, बाकी मतभेद है, एनएसजी पे मतभेद उभरा हुआ है, लिस्टिंग ऑफ मसूद अजहर पे उभरा हुआ है, सीपीईसी पे उभरा हुआ है, लेकिन हम अपने मतभेदों को विवादों तक ना बढ़ने दें, विवादों में ना बदलने दें.
China has told India repeatedly to withdraw troops from Doklam, which it calls as its own territory. New Delhi has said that troops from both sides should withdraw for a dialogue as Doklam belongs to its ally, Bhutan. As both sides refuse to budge, the big question is, will China wait to resolve the issue diplomatically or choose the military option? Bureau Report, WION.
All right, now if you were to go by this report, it is clear that China is mulling the option of a war at the Doklam Plateau, while India on its part has been continuously saying that a diplomatic solution is the only way forward. If you remember, the Global Times has been leading the psychological war on India ever since the standoff began about 2 months ago now. It's a weekly affair now when China's Global Times comes up with a hard-hitting article talking about war with India over the current standoff at Doklam. Remember, India has been backing its old-time ally Bhutan on this entire matter. This is a very strategic spot at the tri-junction between the countries. Now, China has been upping the ante, calling it its territory, refusing to back off. China says Indian forces, Indian troops must first back off from the tri-junction, while India insists that both sides should back off simultaneously, and that's the biggest point of contention at this particular point in time. In fact, India's External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj a few days ago in Parliament made it clear that India and China should work at a solution to end the standoff at the Doklam Plateau through diplomatic channels, while China has been upping the ante, talking about war. And the latest article talks about a small-scale military operation in which China says it will expel Indian troops, and they're planning such an operation in 2 weeks' time. A couple of days ago, in a television interview, the director of Chinese Defense Military Center for International Security and Cooperation, a senior colonel, said that the Indian troops were on Chinese territory. In fact, he said that if India doesn't want war, then it must back off from Doklam. And remember, China has been calling India's NSA schemer as well, and it also called the External Affairs Minister a liar a couple of days ago. All right, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. Dr. Brahmachalani, who's a professor of strategic studies at the Center for Policy Research, he is joining us live right now from New Delhi. Dr. Chalani, thanks so much for joining us. Now, just a day after India ruled out the possibility of going to war with China on the Doklam plateau, you see China upping the ante once again, saying a small-scale military operation is now being planned. What do you make of this?
China is ratcheting up its war rhetoric, and that's very unfortunate because the Indian side is emphasizing diplomacy, but the Chinese side is emphasizing something else. It's largely warmongering by China. And I think the risks of a military conflict, of a Chinese attack, cannot be discounted. Though today's report in the Global Times, quoting some analysts, warning of a Chinese attack at Doklam. That report may be part of China's psychological operations against India. Yet we cannot discount the possibility of a Chinese attack, if not at Doklam, but somewhere else along the border where India's defenses are weak.
All right, Dr. Chalani, do stay with me. Joining me live from Hong Kong via Skype is Andrew K.P. Leong. He is an international and independent strategist. Thanks so much, Mr. Leong, for joining us here on WION. I want to ask you, how much of it that is published on Global Times should one take as the official stance of the Chinese government?
Well, in fact, the Chinese government has already announced its position a number of times on television, formally stating that, of course, that is Chinese occupied territory, even if disputed, and definitely that piece of land does not belong to India and belongs, and the disputant is, of course, only Bhutan, even though Bhutan is, of course, is protected by India. And of course, China is what China has done is only the road construction, even if that is perceived as a threat. But nevertheless, a road construction is not a military action. But the fact remains that Indian soldiers are now inside Chinese territory, even if it's claimed territory. So to China, under international law, that is an act of aggression. And obviously, China cannot back down. And I think that the Chinese government has made it very, very clear. But having said that, though, I don't think China wants a war. In fact, the two countries don't want to have a war. I think the best way to resolve it is through negotiations, is through talks behind the scenes, because either country can afford to lose face in this situation. So I think that the best way is to talk it over.
Right.
And manage the situation.
Right. But, again, going back to my question, and I have another question for you as well, but how much of what is published on the Chinese daily Global Times should be taken as the official stance of the Chinese government? For instance, in the latest report, it's talking of a small-scale military operation, saying that it will expel Indian troops from that particular area on the Doklam plateau, and that, India's got 2 weeks' time to back off.
Well, I think that this is because the Global Times is almost an unofficial organ of the Chinese government, and they're not likely to be so specific without some degree of authorization from the Chinese government. And as I said, the Chinese government position is very, very clear. Indeed, there is already a body of public opinion building up inside China, saying that that this is really ridiculous. So no country can send army to the territory controlled by another country, even that piece of land is disputed. Particularly the soldiers belong to a country which has no territorial claim over that piece of land. Right. So under international law, this is totally untenable.
Dr. Brahmachalani, would you like to respond to Mr. Leong over here? There have been innumerable number of cases where China has initiated an aggression. China is known to be belligerent. Look at the cases in the South China Sea. I want your response to what Mr. Leong is saying here.
China likes to play the victim in any dispute or conflict. It has a history of playing the victim, even when it carries out an invasion. For example, in 1962, when it carried out the Trans-Himalayan invasion against India, it played the victim. So it's no surprise that they're playing the victim even today. But Andrew is right. The narrative that China has presented to its own people and to the world is that India is the aggressor, that India has entered Chinese territory. So far, the international focus has been on China's territorial and maritime expansion. But suddenly, the attention has shifted to the supposed armed intrusion by India. Now, this raises a very serious challenge for President Xi Jinping's regime. There is a nationalistic backlash in China, especially from netizens, asking what is the Xi Jinping regime doing? Why hasn't it managed to evict the intruders? So China has painted itself in a corner by presenting this narrative, and now there's pressure on it to respond to this very narrative.
Right. Mr. Leong, you know, if you look at it one way, it seems China is continuously sending out mixed messages. On the one hand, there are talks of diplomatically ending the standoff on Doklam. On the other hand, you have the Global Times publishing these, articles talking of war, this time small-scale military operations. What sense, should India or New Delhi make of this?
Well, I think that New Delhi should treat it very, very seriously because don't forget the Indian army across the territory has already been nearly over a week or so, or even more. So I think that China had not reacted immediately, and to countries on both sides. I mean, these are large countries on both sides. This is a degree of tolerance already. But that situation cannot be allowed to continue indefinitely, because, as I said, that would be an affront regarded as an affront to the Chinese nation. And as I said, China doesn't want to have a war, and all it has done is building the roads, even though if the building is perceived as a threat. So I think the best way is for both sides to talk it over. And in fact, China has made that overture before. But that apparently the overture is not listened to. So China cannot, of course, afford to just let the situation carry on without responding.
All right. It is to be pointed out over here that not once has India really talked of a war. It has said that it's ready to respond in case there is any Chinese aggression or China initiates something. But Dr. Brahmachalani, coming to you at this point, tactically speaking, what's the ground reality? Can India give China a bloody nose if, if what Global Times is saying does happen within 2 weeks?
That's a good question. This crisis has dragged on for nearly 8 weeks now. If China really believed that India had intruded into its territory, and given the fact that China is militarily superior to India, they would have employed force by now. But the reality is different. First, the political reality is that this road construction and the standoff have happened in a disputed area, an area that belongs to Bhutan, which China has sought to encroach upon. The second reality is that in that tri-junction area, where the borders of Bhutan, Sikkim, and Tibet meet, China does not have the military advantage to give India a bloody nose, because there the advantage lies with India. India holds higher terrain there. India has greater troop density in that tri-junction area. So India has strong defenses in that area. If China attempts to launch hostilities in the tri-border area, it will be not India, but China that will end up with a bloody nose. So China might try to initiate hostilities somewhere else along the long Himalayan border where Indian defenses are weak. It might try to launch a surprise attack, carry out a major intrusion into India and hold on to Indian territory as a sort of a source of leverage to make India relent in Doklam. That possibility we should not discount.
Absolutely. Let me take this to Mr. Leong at this point. You know, how much, Mr. Leong, weapons and the kind of tactical weapons that are needed in this particular area can China bring to the table? India has 2 fully functional mountain brigades in this area. Is there a possibility, as Dr. Chelani suggests, that perhaps not this side of the border, but another side is what China picks to attack India? Could it be a surprise attack then?
Well, frankly, I mean, of course, I'm not party to the military planning, but I think that for China to cause an incursion into Indian territory would amount to China losing the moral high ground, in the sense that at the moment, under international law, is the Indian the soldiers crossing into China's claimed territory. But for China to react by invading India on another front, that means that China would lose the moral high ground. I don't think tactically that's a very good move. But as far as that particular area is concerned, the fact remains that Indian soldiers are in the territory of another country. So I think that that is a tactical advantage that China is likely to enjoy. And of course, China has a huge military and is already doing exercises in the vicinity. So I don't think that China is prevented from deploying forces to drive out these Indian soldiers there.
All right, point taken, Mr. Leong. Now, another reason for worry perhaps for India could be, Dr. Chelani, a latest Comptroller and Auditor General report which said that India does not have enough ammunition to fight a war for more than 10 days. This is one report that was immediately picked up by the Chinese media just minutes before it hit the headlines in the country.
The report, unfortunately, was released by the government of India at a wrong time. Timing is very important, along with transparency in a democracy, but you shouldn't be releasing a report of this kind at the height of border tensions with an adversary like China. But I think if one reads that report very carefully, it's talking about deficiencies in terms of a maximalist scenario, a multi-front war scenario where India is involved in wars both with China and Pakistan on different fronts. And in that kind of a scenario, it talks about the lack of enough ammunition stocks. No military in the world is happy with its weapons armory, with its ammunition stocks. Every military wants more and more. So the Indian military certainly is not happy with the existing stocks, but it's in terms of what is optimal scenario in terms of stocks of ammunition and weapons. It's not in terms of what we are facing today. The danger that we are facing today in relation to China is a localized military conflict. For that, India has sufficient weaponry and sufficient ammunition. But if I could add one other point that Andrew was making, which is that China claims to have the moral high ground. Nobody believes that. Chinese propaganda is such that often the Chinese state begins to believe what it propagates and begins to act upon its own propaganda. Today, the reality is that the world hasn't bought the Chinese story. Nobody believes that India is the aggressor, that India has intruded into Chinese territory. This is a narrative that Beijing has presented, and having presented the narrative, now it has to justify to its own people why it is so weak in addressing this alleged aggression by India. The reality is that one of the world's largest countries, China, has encroached on the territory of one of the world's smallest countries, Bhutan. That is the reality, and that is what the world believes.
Right. Also, Mr. Leong, do you think it's important for China to maintain the stand, also to give out a message to all the other countries, perhaps, who are engaged in, the territorial issues in the South China Sea, whom China is engaged with at this point in time, perhaps? But would it be the right move to choose this platform, a war with India, to send a message to those countries?
Well, it's not of China's choosing. I mean, this incident was caused by, you can say it was triggered by China's building a road, but it's on China's side of the territory. But the incursion is caused by the Indian Army into the territory of another nation, even if it's disputed between Bhutan and China. So I don't think that this is an incident of China's choosing. As far as the South China Sea is concerned, of course you can see the situation has already calmed down a great deal, and countries concerned are prepared to negotiate and talk it over, and the situation is being managed. But this particular flashpoint is not of China's choosing, and I don't think China wants it. And in fact, there is the public is being informed, and also the international community is aware of the actual situation, the facts on the ground, even they may not agree with either side.
All right. It's very important for us to bring both sides of the story on the show. I'd request both of my guests to please stay on with me for a few more moments, a couple of more questions, but before that, a report. Well, this is not the first time that India and China are standing against each other. Over the years, China has resorted to psychological warfare to counter India's slowly and steadily growing influence in the region. For that, a look at this report.
India and China continue to be at loggerheads, but it's not just on the ground in Doklam. China continues to indulge in psychological warfare combined with media warfare, repeatedly sending warnings through its state-run media. Just yesterday, India's MEA spokesperson Gopal Baglai emphasized on use of diplomatic channels to resolve the ongoing border dispute.
As far as the questions regarding deployment are concerned, these are operational matters, whether on our side or on the other side, and I wouldn't like to specifically go into that. As far as the construction of road is concerned, the development of our border areas, in fact, any part of India is a legitimate matter of interest for the government as well as its responsibility.
Upping the ante, Global Times slammed the Narendra Modi government for pushing India into a war. But this is not the first instance of verbal attack from China. Just last week, Global Times said it is time that India be taught a second lesson and described National Security Advisor Ajit Doval as the main schemer behind the ongoing standoff. On June 30th, the People's Liberation Army spokesperson warned Indian Army Chief General Bipin Rawat to stop clamoring for war and dismissed Rawat's remarks that India was ready for a 2.5-front war as extremely irresponsible. 30 days after the standoff, Minister of External Affairs Sushma Swaraj said in the parliament that India has support from all countries. In response, Global Times said that she had lied in the parliament and warned China of resolving the conflict through non-diplomatic means. Then came the BRICS summit, and the NSAs of the two countries met. While India refrained from divulging details of the meeting, Chinese President Xi Jinping, in response, issued a veiled threat, saying China has the confidence of defeating all invasions. And less than a week ago, reports emerged of a Chinese incursion in Uttarakhand. The Doklam standoff began 2 months ago, and there is no end in sight. Faced by vitriolic warmongering by the Chinese government, India has so far managed to defy the dragon. But will India be able to call China's bluff? Bureau Report, WION.
Dr. Brahmachalani, taking on from what Mr. Leong was talking about before we played out this report, it seems the case is plain and simple. China is angry that India is backing Bhutan the way that it is. But the question then again remains, is China willing to go all out, allocate its resources to its eastern, borders, allocating all those sources, diverting its army to the eastern borders? Does that make sense? Is it something that China is likely to do? Because that is certainly the biggest question over here. There have been talks of resolving it diplomatically, but till yet there's been no headway.
The real issue is this, that so far, bluff and bluster have worked for China. It has managed to intimidate its neighbors into submission on issues that it believes are vital to its interests. Most recently, less than 2 weeks ago, it threatened military action against Vietnam, against Vietnamese outposts on the Spratly Islands, and forced Hanoi to suspend drilling for gas at the edge of Vietnam's own exclusive economic zone. Vietnam has every right under international law, under UNCLOS, to drill for gas within its exclusive economic zone, but China used coercion, threat and bluster to force Vietnam to halt that drilling. Now, for the first time, China's threat and bluster are not working because India has held its ground and refused to be cowed down. This is the problem that China is facing, that it's bluster and bullying.
Point taken, Dr. Chilani. I have about 30 seconds, but I want to give a chance to Mr. Leong also to make his point. Mr. Leong, very quickly, concluding comments from you.
Well, I think it's a game of chicken. If you say there's a bluster, it can be on looking at it from both sides is the same. But I don't think that China is going to back down because the territorial integrity is really a core issue. You look at it in the South China Sea, even though it's China claimed territory, claimed waters, China's been very, very consistent in defending its position, using whatever means necessary. But I think in this time, it's a big country like India, and then China, of course, doesn't want a war. But on the other hand, China cannot afford to back down either. So I think that the best way is to resolve it through diplomatic means.
Absolutely, and we do hope that does happen. Dr. Brahmachalani and Mr. Leong, thanks so much for joining us here. Territorial integrity for China is supreme, but this is the Indian government stand as well. It is not going to back off unless and until there is a diplomatic solution. Thanks so much. That's it then on the show this evening. Taking a short break. We'll be right back with the top stories.